Did you know we can create an entire HTML page without using CSS? Or did you know how we can send data from an HTML file without using any programming language? If not, you should watch this video at least once. In this video, we'll be learning everything we need to know about HTML before we can create a web page purely on HTML only. And at the end of this video, we'll apply everything we learned in this video to create a beautiful web design. So please watch till the end. If you know a bit of HTML and just want to cover certain topics, you can go to the description and use the timeline to skip to that part quickly. Before starting, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Welcome to Webtrickshome. So, I'll be using Sublime Text 3 as my HTML editor. You can use any one you like. Just the basic Windows Notepad will also work fine, but an integrated development environment or IDE like Sublime Text 3, Notepad++, Atom, Visual Studio or Dreamweaver will make your task much easier and faster. If you haven't installed one, pause the video, get one of the IDE installed on your computer and you're good to go. Ready? Let's get started. First of all, let's create a new folder to save the file. That'll keep the files organized. Let's say HTML. Let's give it a name. Let's say lesson1, and the file extension must be either .stm or .html. Let's go with .html. Let's type in some dummy text in our file, save it, and open the file in browser. And you can see the texts are being shown without us needing to write any HTML markups. Now you see how easy it is to create a web page, right? Let's add another paragraph in our web page. Let's add a bit of space between the paragraphs and reload the browser. And you see both paragraphs are merged into a single paragraph. Let's try one more time. And you can see the same result. That's because browsers will compress all the empty spaces into one single space and display the content. And that's the reason we need the HTML language to pass information to the browser explaining how we want our contents to be displayed. Moreover, we'll also need HTML language to display headings, subheadings, and paragraphs with text formattings like bold, italics, underlines, or highlights. And we'll also need HTML language to display hyperlinks, lists, images, audio, and video files. While we might also need to add forms, maps, or even YouTube videos in our web page. We'll learn each of them one by one here in this single video, so keep watching. Well, HTML is the abbreviation of Hyperlink Markup Language or TEX, where hyperlink means the links that we find in web pages from where we can view other web pages of the same website or other websites. Markup language means the syntax we use in HTML file to pass information to the browser on how we want the contents to appear in a web page, while everything we write in an HTML file will be in the form of the text. Alright? The basic structure of a HTML file will start with the HTML markup that defines the start of an HTML file and ends with a closing HTML markup. The only difference between the opening and the closing markups will be the forward slash just after the opening less than sign. Inside the HTML markups will be the head markup, which will store links to files related to the web page along with additional information for the browser. The only thing we need here as of now would be the title of the web page that will be placed inside the title markups. Let's say HTML lesson Webtrickshome. Refresh the browser and you'll see the title of the web page instead of the file name on the tab. We can also instruct the browser to support universal characters by adding meta character set equals to UTF-8, which means Unicode. Then we add the body markup. This is the markup where all elements that we want to display in our web page for the users are added. You can also add the same content inside the head markup, and that too will be displayed in the web page, but that will be against the HTML conventions and will impact the web page ranking in search engines, so you should avoid doing that. Till now, you might have noticed all the markups are in pairs, which means all of them have an opening and a closing markup. That's true for almost all markups, while a couple of markups are the exceptions. You better add one more information on top of the HTML file as doctype HTML, and that will inform the browser that you are using the latest version of HTML. Alright? With the latest IDE, you can simply type HTML and hit enter to get the basic HTML structure on your page. That's how IDE works. With the HTML markups, we can define text as headings, subheadings, and paragraphs, while with the text, we can also use text formattings like bold, italics, underline, line through, highlights, superscripts, or subscripts. Okay. We can hide the contents that we want in our file, but do not want them to be displayed in the browser by commenting them. All you need to do is type in a less than sign followed by an exclamation mark and 2 hyphens to start comment, and close it with 2 hyphens and a greater than sign. To define a heading in HTML, we need to wrap text inside a heading markup that contains an hex and a number from 1 to 6. Hex symbolizes the heading, while the number defines the size of heading. H1 will be the biggest and H6 will be the smallest. Refresh the browser and you can see a large heading text on your web page. The default size of H1 will be 32 pixels. Add some text after the heading markup and you can see the content appears in another line, maintaining some space between the heading and the content itself. That's because heading markup will take up the entire width of the screen on the line where they appear, regardless of the content width it has. Let's have a look at the other heading sizes then. Here you can see the heading sizes are gradually decreasing with the increment in heading number. H1 was 32 pixels big, while H2 is 24 pixels. H3 is 18.72 pixels. H4 takes up the default text size of the browser, that is generally 16 pixels, but with bold text. H5 is 13.28 pixels, and the smallest heading H6 is 10.72 pixels. Most of the times, we use headings up to heading 3 only. That's all about headings. Then we've got the paragraphs, and for paragraphs, we need to wrap text inside a P markup. This is a paragraph, and if you write anything behind the paragraph markup, it will appear below the paragraph with some space added between the content and the paragraph. So, the paragraph also takes up the entire width of the screen, regardless of the content width. Markups like headings or paragraphs, which take up the entire width of the screen and force other elements to start from another line, are called block elements. With the paragraph element, we can also add an attribute named align to define the alignment of the paragraph text, which can be left, right, center, and justify. Align left is the default value here. You can see how the paragraph text appear here. Sometimes you might need to start a new line but don't want the space between the contents be larger like a paragraph leaves. In such cases, you can use the break rule, which will break the continuity of the element within the line and force the following content to appear on a new line. The markup will be BR, and it is one of those few HTML markups that don't have a closing pair. You can see how the contents appear after the break rule. Just like the break rule, we have a markup called horizontal rule that defines the end of a section and start of another by adding a horizontal line in the web page. This is also an empty markup or single markup that doesn't have a closing pair. You can see how it appears. Sometimes you might need to display contents with custom defined indentation for maybe songs, poems, or some mathematical equations, and we saw earlier that's not supported by browser, right? In such cases, you can wrap the content in a pre-markup. Pre means pre-formatted text and will preserve the empty space within the markup to show contents as they are written. These pre-formatted texts are displayed in another font rather than the regular font by browsers, which you can change easily with little bit of CSS, which we'll learn in our forthcoming lessons. For now, we'll concentrate in HTML only. Sticking to the text formats, sometimes we need to make the text bold, italics, underline, line through, highlights, superscript or subscript, and for each of them, we have markups with which we will wrap the content we want to format and the text formatting will be applied. These markups are called inline elements because they only take up the space the content inside those markups need and allow succeeding contents to appear on the right hand side. Let's start with the bold. Start B markup before the text you want to make bold and close it where you want the bold text to end. Refresh the browser and you can see the changes. Instead of bold markup, we can also use strong markup that will produce the same result visually, but technically strong represents important text or phrases within the document and is prioritized by search engines like Google or Bing. It means the page containing text inside the strong markup are listed as search results when similar content is searched by internet users, while bold markup is added in pages for a visual impact only. Similarly, you can use I markup to italicize a text. You can see the result here. You can also italicize text with the EM markup, which means emphasized text, and just like strong, emphasized texts are prioritized by search engines while the italicized texts are for visual impact only. If you have noticed so far, the latest markup needs to be closed first before the preceding markup, right? That's the rule of HTML. If you want to underline the text, you can use the U markup. You can also underline text with INS markup. INS stands for inserted text, which means the text inside the INS markup is recently added to the page. You can highlight a text with the mark syntax. You can add a line through the text with DEL markup, which means deleted text, which you mostly see on e-commerce websites representing deleted old prices followed by new prices. If you want to display text as subscript, you can use the sub markup. And if you want text as superscript, you can use the sup markup. To make the text relatively smaller, you can use the small markup. And mostly used by programmers is the Q markup for quotation mark. As a designer, you can type in the quotation mark from your keyboard, but in programming, quotation mark is a part of syntax. The server can misinterpret the general quotation mark with the one for syntax, so programmers generally use markup for quotations. Then there's a specific markup for citation. If you want to add contents from another web page in your page, then you can use the block quote markup with the citation attribute to define the source from where the content is extracted. Browser will display such content with a bit of indentation on the left. The source won't be disclosed in your page, but you can bypass the copyright law with this markup. You can also add the citation on your page with the cite markup, where you'll be adding the reference source followed by the author's name, and you can see how it is displayed. Whenever you need to write a long phrase or name repeatedly within a page, you can use the abbreviation markup. The full name will be written inside the title attribute of the markup, while the abbreviated form will be wrapped by the markup. And on the browser, the abbreviated form will be displayed with a dotted underline, and if you move your mouse over the text, the full form will be displayed. So that's all about text in HTML. Let's add images in our web page then. To add an image in a web page, we need the markup img. This markup also doesn't have a closing pair. The markup will have a source attribute src, where the location of the image must be defined along with the name of the image and the image format. Let's try to add an image from an online source. All you have to do is copy the image address and paste it inside the source attribute. That's called absolute path. Refresh the browser and you can see the image. The browser will show the image with its original width and height, which might not be what we are looking for. So we can define the width and height of the image or any one of those values. And you can see the image reduced to the defined size. Defining both width and height is not recommended though, as it might alter the aspect ratio of the image and make them ugly by stretching them vertically or horizontally. So it's always better to go with one value and the other will be automatically set on the basis of the image aspect ratio. Most often than not, we define the width and that too in percentage value instead of the pixel value, because these days over 80% of internet users use mobile phones to surf web pages, and there's no point in displaying images with more width than that of a mobile phone screen, which generally falls between 320 to 460 pixels. If we define the width in percentage, the percentage value will be applied to the image depending upon the screen size. You can see the result here in larger and smaller screens. But if we define the image width in pixel, the width will remain constant and thus might force the user to scroll left and right to view the content, which might feel terrible as a user. Now let's see what happens when we misspell the file path or file name or the image is deleted from the source. In such cases, an icon for broken image is displayed by the browser. You might have seen them regularly on old websites or on websites with huge number of images when the internet speed is too slow. In either cases, this icon refers to the browser's inability to load the image, and the user will have no idea what was there. We can add an alternative text to appear when the image could not be loaded to prevent such situations. All you need to do is add an alt attribute in your image markup and describe the image. Now, every time the browser fails to load the image description will appear. When the image is loaded, the description won't appear. So, adding images from online sources was easy, right? Let's see how we can add images from our own local source then. Let's move some images inside the project folder. That's how the images will be stored in live server. Now, if you need to display the image from the same server where the HTML file is, we can use relative path. That means we can define the path of the image depending upon where the HTML file is. Here, the HTML file and image are next to each other. So, we can simply write the file name with the extension in the source attribute. Let's copy the file name with its extension. If you don't see the file extension, you'll need to go to the View tab and check File Name Extensions, and the file extensions will appear along with the file names. Let's define the width and alt attribute too. Refresh the browser, and you can see the image. If the image is inside a folder next to the HTML file, we can write the folder name and the image name. And the image will be displayed. If the image is inside a folder that is inside another folder beside the HTML file, then you'll define the image source like first folder, second folder, and image name. And you can see the image. So basically the relative path defines where the image is located from the HTML file. Let's change the width to 25%, and you can see the images lined up next to each other. Just like the text formatting markups, image markup is also an inline element. Let's have a look how we display images if they were outside the folder containing HTML file then. Let's load this image on our web page. Here, to define the path, all you need to do is add two dots and a / to define the location of the image is one folder outside of the HTML file. So multiple folders behind would have multiple ... and slashes, and then the file name and the file format. And you can see the image loads up in the web page. Let's say the image is inside a folder in the same place. Then what you would do is ... folder name and the file details. And you can see the image in your web page. Alternatively, you can open the property of an image and copy the image path from there and define the file name. That will show up the image in your browser. But if you need to send the web page file to others, that's not going to work because you won't be sending images from other sources to your receivers, and even if you send those images, to show them up in the web page, they will need to place the image right on the location you define in your file, and that will be close to impossible. Furthermore, when you upload your web page files to server, then they will give you a location where you'll place all files, and those servers won't have anything like C drive, D drive, or E drive. Alright? The best practice would be to add all images inside a folder may be named images right beside the HTML file. And if you have huge number of images, you can further reorganize them by creating another folder inside the images folder, just like what we did for the third and fourth images here. Alright, let's jump into adding audio files then. Let's copy an audio file to the project folder. WAV, OGG, and MP3 are the audio file formats supported by most browsers. It's better to go with MP3 format as it is only audio format supported by all browsers. Let's go with Into Deep by Psalm 41. I like the intro of this song a lot. Let's create a separate folder to keep media files. Copy the file name and format. To add an audio file into the web page, you will need the audio markup. And inside the audio markup, you'll add the source markup with the source attribute, where you'll define the file path just like we did with the images. And since audio files will have nothing to show up in the browser, we'll add the controls attribute to the audio markup, and that will display the audio controls in the web page. Refresh the browser, and you can see the audio controls. Hit the play button to play the audio. You'll also get the volume control and scroller to go forward or backward too. You can also add a message to display in browsers where the audio file is not supported. Alright, let's jump into adding video files then. Let's copy a video file to the project folder. I'll go with Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd. WEBM, OGG, and MP4 are the video file formats supported by most of the browsers, and MP4 is the only one supported by all browsers. For video, you'll need to add the video markup with the source markup defining the file location. We can ignore the type attribute that is used to define the file type and file format. You will also need to add controls in the video markup. And since video files have some width and height, we can define the width of the video in our HTML file, and the height will be automatically set as per the spec ratio. You'll get the option to play the video along with the scroller to move forward or backward. Volume control is there, along with the option to go full screen as well as picture-in-picture. With the latest trend, people generally prefer uploading videos in YouTube and embed them in web pages to save the storage space and server. So let's see how we can load a YouTube video in our web page. Alright, let's go to YouTube, then to Webtrickshome. All you need to do is right click on the video and copy the embed code, and then all you need to do is paste the code in your HTML file. Alter the width and height to your liking. Refresh the browser, and you can see the YouTube video in your web page with all the options. Let's add a fully functional Google map into our web page then. Go to Google Maps and select the location you want to display on your web page. I'll go with the International Airport close to my residence. Click on the Share option and go to the Embed tab. You can select a size from here, but we can do that on our own, right? So let's just copy the HTML and paste it in your file. Alter the width and height to your liking. Refresh the browser, and you can see a fully functional Google map in your web page. Talking about the iframe, it is an HTML markup basically used to load another web page in an HTML page. It was highly used in the past, but since the web design concept is totally focused on device responsiveness these days, you won't see much iframes in web pages. Let's talk about another important thing in HTML web page, links then. Before that, let's comment out the media objects that will help the page load faster. To add links, we use the anchor tag A, where the attribute href, that means hyperlink reference, will hold the web page links. Let's say I want to link Google here, and just like the media files, you'll need to write absolute URL for links that connects to another website while relative URL from the page itself will work for the URL of your websites or the pages. The text inside the sref attribute won't be visible, so we'll need to add some text or images inside the anchor markup to display the link. Let's write Google here. And you can see the link text. Click on the link and you'll be redirected to that website. You can also add the link to images. Let's connect Webtrickshome from here. And you can see here the cursor changes to pointer on the linked image. Click on it and you'll be redirected to that website. Let's have a look at the relative link to them. For that, I'll create a new HTML file here. Let's say new page. Let's write some dummy text. Let's add a link here. Since the new page is right beside the HTML file we are working on, we can simply write the file name here and that will work fine. Click on the link and you can see the new page loaded. One thing to remember here is that it's totally fine to load your other pages from the same website in the same tab, but if you allowed other external links to open in the same tab, the user might never return back to your web page again. So what we do is open such web pages in another tab, which keeps our web page still open and the chance of the user returning back to our web page increases. For that, all we need to do is add a target attribute to our anchor markup. The default value will be self. Let's set the value as _blank. That will force the link to open in a new tab. Let's have a look. Click on the link and you can see the link opens in a new tab. In images where you can't show the link text that represents where the user will be sent after clicking the link, you can add the attribute title to the anchor markup. Then, whenever a user places his mouse over the linked image, the title will be shown. In fact, you can add title to any HTML markup where you want to show the titles. So that's all about links. Let's jump into lists then. Sometimes you might need to display text, images, or links in lists in your web page. For that, you have got two options, namely ordered list and unordered list. Ordered list will order the list item numerically or alphabetically, while unordered list will list the items with bullets. For ordered list, you have the OL markup, and each list item inside the OL markup must be wrapped inside the LI markup. And you can see here the items are listed in numeric order. Other options available are small letter a, capital A, Roman I, and capital I. You'll need to define the type attribute with one of those values. And you can see the order is changed. For unordered list, the wrapper will be UL instead of OL. And you can see how it appears. The default bullet type is disk here, while the other available options are square and circle. Let's change it to square. And you can see the bullet type is changed. Now, what if you need a new list inside one of the existing list items? That's called nested list. And for that, all you need to do is start a new UL or OL inside the list item markup where you want the nested list to appear. Let's go with the second item here. Before the closing list item markup, we'll start a new OL and close it too. Add some items. And you can see how they appear. Let's go one level further deep. Let's go inside the last item and start a new OL there. and you can see how they appear. You can even ignore the type attribute and still one of the list type different from the existing one appears. Now let's have a look at some text characters which we can't find in our keyboard. How do we add them in our web page? The most used ones are the copyright, registered, etc. For such characters, HTML has defined some codes. If you write them in your page, the characters will appear. Like for copyright, you'll need to write and copy semicolon. For registered and reg semicolon. For trademark and trade. For double arrow right and RAQO. For left double arrow, it's LAQO. Then you have got the left arrow, right arrow, up arrow, and down arrow. You can find hundreds of such special characters and the character set you need to write to get such characters. But the thing I wanted to show you here is that we can't write any text inside a less than sign and a greater than sign. HTML will interpret them as markups and they won't be shown in web pages. So if you need to write something like that, you must use an LT for less than sign and GT for greater than sign. Check your browser and you can see the text as you wanted. If you need any characters that you can't find in your keyboard, then you can search for HTML special characters or HTML entities in search engines. You can also find a few of them in my website. Link is in the description. Let's see how we can add form elements in our web page then. There are a huge number of form elements available. And here we'll look at the most used ones like field to add username or name, email, password, self dropdown, date, time, large text box, also known as text area, checkbox, radio, and buttons. Most of the form elements start with the markup input, where the type defines either you want to allow the user to add a name, email, password, date, time, or other things. Let's go with the text for the name. The name attribute works as a reference to the value sent via form. It states which value is sent from which form field. Let's say it's username. Refresh the browser and you can see how the form field appears. Let's add a title to the form field to explain the users what value you want in that field. Let's say it's full name and you can see how it looks. Alternatively, you can also add a placeholder attribute instead of the title to display the information inside the form field itself. You can see how it appears. Click on the field and start typing and the placeholder text will disappear. You can also define the size of the input field with size attribute. It will define how many text characters are visible in the field. You can ignore it though. You can also set a default value for the input field with the value attribute. Then you can restrict the user to type in a value of defined length with max length and min length attributes. You can also make the field disabled with the disabled attribute or read-only attribute. If you want to make a form field compulsory for the user to fill up to submit the form, you can add the required attribute. Browser will display a message whenever a user tries to submit the form without filling up those required fields and prevent the form from being submitted. Let's go with another input type then. We can use type email to ask for user's email. Input type email will check if the input values match the email pattern. If it doesn't match the email pattern, browser will display an error message and prevents the form from being submitted. All other attributes we saw before can be added. Then let's say input type password. The input type password will automatically hide the input value. If you see the input type date, a calendar will appear from where you can select the date. You can manually enter the values too. In input type time, a clock will appear from where you can select time. For select drop-down, we have the select markup. Inside the select markup, you need to add values inside the option markup, which will be displayed as a drop-down. You can add multiple attributes to allow users to choose multiple values here. Input type radio is used to allow users select only one option from the available ones, and it's mostly used for gender. Radio will show a circle in a web page without any information, so we add the corresponding values behind the input markup for radio. Since a user can only click on the circle, we'll add the value ourselves here. Name for each of these options will be same, while the values will be different. For multiple selection in similar scenario, we'll use the input type checkbox. This will show up as a square checkbox in the web page. Name will be same for all the fields, while the values will be different. We can't use required in radio and checkboxes, so what we do is keep one of the values checked by default. If the user opts for another value, he will change it, else the same value will be submitted. For that, we can add checked attribute to one of the inputs here. For large text box, text area markup is used. For the width of the text area, we define curls for the number of characters visible horizontally and rows for characters to be visible vertically. You can also add all attributes we saw in input here. Then you can use the input type submit to add a submit button. The value will be the text you want as text on the button. And you can add input type reset to clear all the form fields. You can see how they appear. Let's keep them in a separate paragraph to make them appear below the text area. And instead of input, you can also use the markup button for buttons. Button has a closing pair, so instead of value, we'll write the text we want to show on the button between the markups. Refresh the browser, and you can see it works the same. If you fill up the form and try to submit it, the form is not going to work because the form elements must be inside the form markup to be functional. Let's add that and try to send the data. With the form markup added, now if you try to submit the form without values, browser will display error message and prevent the form data from being submitted because the input fields with required attribute are not filled up. Let's fill some data then. With the input type email, browser will ask the user to follow the email address pattern. Once the data is filled up, click on the Submit button. You can see the page is reloaded and the data is sent to the URL. This is the default method used by forms to send data. When there's sensitive information like username, password, or bank details being sent through the form, we need to prevent it from being passed to the URL. For that, all you need to do is add an attribute named method in the form markup with the value post. Now, if you submit any data, the server will try to process the data, but they won't appear in the URL. And if you filled up some fields and hit the cancel button, the values will be cleared from those fields. Alright. Unfortunately, the data being sent via these pure HTML forms are lost because there's no way an HTML page can process the data. You'll need to add a bit of PHP or Java or some other programming language codes to be able to process them. But staying purely on the HTML base, one thing we can do is send this data via email. All you need to do is add an attribute action in the form markup with mail to column and the email address where you want the data to be sent. Now fill in the form and click on the Submit button. And your default mailing app will open up with the mailing address and the data added from the form as message. So this way we can send data from a pure HTML form too. We can also add a button to upload file or photo in our form with the input type file. That will appear as a button to choose file in the web page. Click on it and you can select files to send through the form. You can also add an attribute multiple to the input type file and that will allow you to upload multiple files at once. You can see the name of the uploaded file beside the file upload button. But sadly, we can't process the file uploads with clean HTML. So that's all you need to know about HTML forms. Let's go to our last topic, that is HTML tables. And with the HTML tables, we'll design a web page too in the selection. Let's add it on the top so that it's easy to view. HTML tables are defined with the markup table in HTML. You can further group the table contents into t-head, t-body, and t-foot, which are very useful in styling tabular data. But for now, we'll ignore those markups and focus solely on the important ones. In HTML tables, data are added horizontally row by row. So the first markup inside an HTML table will be tr, which defines the start and end of a row. Inside the row, we'll add ts or td markups to define individual columns. ts will make the contents inside it bold and center aligned, while td will keep the font width normal and left aligned. For the topmost row of the table, we'll use ts for table headings. Let's add some dummy user details. I'll display the serial number, name, email, contact number, and remarks here. Now, for each data, the same pattern will be followed. A row will be started followed by the columns inside it. And the rule to follow here is, in general, no row can have more or less columns than other rows, and each column from each row will have equal width. Refresh the browser, and you can see the data in tabular format. Let's make it look more like a table with some attributes. The first attribute I'll add is the table width. Let's say I want 10% width. Then let's add a border. The border attribute will add a border to each table cells, while the number will define the thickness of the outer border, and you can see how it appears. Now, what if I want to merge all the cells of the remarks column into one, like what we can do in Microsoft Excel? We can easily do that by going to the top cell from where we want to start the cell merge and add an attribute to the cell markup row span, because we want to merge the cells from multiple rows, and the values will be the number of rows whose cell we want to merge. In this case, we have 4 rows, right? So I'll add 4 here. Now, all the cells from the corresponding column from other rows needs to be removed. Refresh the browser and you can see the cells are merged into one. Let's change the serial numbers to here. Now, if you want to merge the columns, you can simply add colspan attribute to one of your cells and define the number of columns you want to merge, and then remove the same number of columns from the row. Let's try it in a new row. Here we have 5 columns, right? Let's merge all of them with colspan 5. Let's type in some dummy text. And you can see the text appear in a cell that is spanning from the very first to the last column in the table. Now, what if we added another cell into that row? That will be column number 6. And since none of the rows have 6 columns, it will appear right behind the 5 columns space. Since the cell has no data, it's taking up small space and there's less impact on the visual presentation of the table, else it will make the table look ugly. Alright? Then what if we need uneven number of columns in different rows? That's the concept of nested table, and web pages with nested table are negatively ranked these days by search engines, so they are almost out of practice. But still, nested table is one of the best way to learn web design easily and quickly. Let's have a look into it then. Let's create a nested table in our new page. Let's start with the table markup. Define the width as 10% and let's add the border too, so that the layout can be seen clearly. Start a row. Let's go with 3 columns. Let's add an image in the left column as a small logo. Let's make the center column center line and bold with TS and add a text as website name. And on the right, let's add the email address, phone, and physical address. You can see how it looks. Let's define the width of the column too. That looks much better. Let's start another row then. Here I'd like to have 2 columns. We could do that with colspan, but I'll merge all the cells into one and then start a new table inside the cell with 10% width and border too. And that's what is called nested table, as we are adding a table inside another table. Start a row inside the new table. Let's make it 2 columns. Let's go with the same 20% width here for the first column, and the rest of the width will be occupied by the other one. I'd like to add a news scroller here. The first column will have the section title, let's say latest news, and the second column will have some text contents that will keep on scrolling. Since the marquee markup I'm using here is already deprecated, I won't be explaining it. You can click on the description link below if you want to know in detail about the marquee. Refresh the browser and you can see the result. Now on the next row, I'd like to have 3 columns with equal width. Let's add an image. If I do that, the layout won't change to my liking as the column width can't be modified for a row. So what I'll do here is merge all 3 columns into one, just like we did above in the preceding section, and then add a new table inside. Start a row with 3 equal width columns. Add the image, a paragraph, and a title. Refresh the browser and you can see the result. Let's repeat it again. Well, that looks nice. Then for the last row, I'll merge the cells again. And start a new table. Start a new row. And this time add 2 equal width columns. First one will hold the copyright information. And the other one will hold information about the designer company. Let's add a link to. Well, that looks good enough. Let's align the text to the right. That looks much better. But let's remove the borders from all tables for a better view. It looks great in all sections apart from the 3 column section, where the text on each column seems attached to the other one. So what I'll do here is add 1 line of CSS to create spacings between the columns. Refresh the browser and you can see the contents with better spacings between them. Now the only thing out of place is the logo image. Let's fix that too with CSS. I'll be explaining these things in our CSS lesson videos, so keep checking out. And here you can see simple yet beautiful web design almost purely in HTML only. We have certainly ignored some of the HTML markups which we'll discuss in our first CSS lesson because we'll need that while we're working with CSS. For now, that's all you need to know about HTML. If you want to learn about each of those topics in detail, you can find the link for each topic in the description below. Hope this video helps you develop your skill in a positive way. Don't forget to hit like if you like this video. Let me know if you want me to create a specific tutorial on some topics through the comment. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe us for more videos. Thank you.